Okay, so this video is on standard 1.6, graphing sine and cosine equations. The first thing we want to take a look at is what are our steps in that process. So there are basically 8 steps we want to take a look at. And they look something like these. So the first thing we want to do is we want to determine the equation of our midline. We already know that's the d value from our equation. We're going to figure out the amplitude, which is our a value from the equation. We're going to calculate the max and min, which are the mid plus the amp and the mid minus the amp. The period is 2 pi over b. We're going to take that period, we're going to break it up into 4 pieces because of the 4 quadrants from that circle that gave us our original graph. That's going to give us how we're going to scale our x-axis. We're going to label those scales on the x-axis, and on the y-axis we are going to go ahead and label the midline, minimum, maximum. Those are going to be the only heights that we plot points at. We're going to figure out where the first point goes based off of if it's sine or cosine, and if it's a positive or negative sine or positive negative cosine. I will point you to this information here as I refer to that. We know sine starts in the midline always. If it's a positive sine equation, the a value is positive, it will head to a max next. If the a value is negative, it will go to the min next. Cosine, remember, starts up high and then drops all the way down. So if it's positive, it will start up high. But if it's negative, that reflection will make it start down low. Once we figure out the starting point, we have the general pattern. It goes from the middle to the top, to the middle to the bottom, to the middle to the top, and that just goes on forever in both directions, just using that pattern. So let's give one a try. I'm going to start with this guy right here. Let's see if I can make this come to the front here. Okay, there we go. So going through that process, the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out the values of A, B, C, and D. So I know from this that the A value is 2, the B value is 1, the C value is negative pi, opposite of what's there, and then the D value is negative 3. So what that tells me, we know that our midline is y equals negative 3. The maximum, we'll say take the amplitude and go above that. The minimum says take the amplitude and go below that. So what is the amplitude? Well, we know that that's our a value, so the amplitude is 2. So our maximum, therefore, is negative 3 of the midline plus 2, which is 1. That's the highest height on my graph. And the minimum will be the negative 3 of the midline minus the amplitude, building it down below, which will take me down to negative 5. So these are my 3 key heights that I care about on my y-axis. Next thing we need to do is figure out the period. We said that the period equals 2 pi over b. And in this case, that's 2 pi over 1, so it's just 2 pi. We said that the x scale for our graph, how I'm going to label my x-axis, comes from taking the period and dividing it by 4 or multiplying it by 1/4. So in this case, that's 2 pi over 4, which reduces to pi over 2. So that's how I'm going to go ahead and label my x-axis. The last thing I need to pay attention to is this C is negative pi. I need to make myself a big fat note that at the end I want to go left pi units before I put my starting point. Okay, so I'll come back to that in a minute. So let's set things up. So draw yourself a y-axis. And before I put my x-axis on, I'm just going to remember again the key heights that we have. So I only need to go up to 1. So I'm going to go ahead and put my axis up pretty high. Let's say it goes there-ish. So I'm going to say that this is 1, negative 3. Oh, sorry, that's incorrect. This is actually negative 1. That was a bad addition on my part. So that should be a negative 1. So this is at negative 1. The midline is at negative 3. And the minimum is at negative 5. I need to label my scale now of pi over 2. I'm going to go ahead and make 2 boxes equal pi over 2 just so my points aren't so squished together. Whatever you choose, make sure you count that many boxes to get to your first mark and then continue it from there. So make sure your scale is constant. This is 3 pi over 2. Next is 2 pi. After that is 2.5 pi, which is 5 pi over 2. 6 pi is 3 pi, and I'm going to go backwards 1 also to show that it goes forever in both directions. Last thing, sine. Sine starts at the midline, and then it goes up. So I'm going to take my pen, and I'm going to put it on the midline at the y-intercept. Before I put my first point, I need to come to the fact that this guy has a transformation left pi. Good thing I gave myself a little room to the left, because that right here is left pi. So I need to be on the midline left pi. So my first point actually is right here at negative pi comma negative 3. And then I'm going to continue. So from the middle, I have to go up to the top. I'm going to put that top height at the next x label, so at negative pi over 2. My next x label after that is 0. I have to go back down because that was the middle, so I have to be going back down. My next x label is pi over 2. I want to keep going down until I get to my minimum. On my way back up now, so mid. On my way back up, max, now to mid, then to min. And I can keep doing this all day, but I don't need to. That's wrong, because if I did it all day, that'd be boring. So, here and then here. To finish, curvy, rounded, curve the best you can. If you miss the point slightly, not a big deal, because I have the point there, so I know that's what you intend. Arrows on both ends, and that is all set. So that's the graph of 2 sine x plus pi minus 3. We can take a minute and look at another one. I'm just going to try one more. I'm going to try this. Let's see. I'm going to try this cosine one here. So if I have cosine 2x plus 4, bring that to the front here. No, I want this guy gone. Okay, very good. So now, cosine 2x plus 4. So again, my first thoughts are, what are my values of a, b, c, and d? So I know a is 1, b is 2, c is nothing. There's nothing being added or subtracted. D is 4. So beginning amplitude is the same as the a, so that's 1. Midline is what I want to consider next. So our midline is y equals d, so it's y equals 4. Our maximum says take your midline value and add the amplitude to it. That brings me to 5. My minimum says take the midline value and subtract the amplitude from it. That brings me to 3. So those are my 3 heights on my y-axis. Now I need to deal with the x-scale. So I'm going to talk about period. The period of this graph, of every graph, is 2 pi over b. But the b value here is 2. So I get that my period is pi. And my x scale, again, the 4 quadrants giving us the 5 key points. So my x scale is going to be the period divided by 4, or the period times 1/4. In this case, that gives me pi over 4. So I have all the information that I need in terms of my labeling. I'm going to go ahead and draw on my y and x axis. Again, paying attention to the fact that these are how I'm going to write my y axis. So I don't need much room below the x-axis at all. So I'm going to put my x-axis down here, and all I care about are heights 3, 4, and 5. So here is 3, here is 4, and here is 5. Sometimes people like to do something like put a little dashed line to remind themselves that these are the only heights that they're going to plot points at. Not part of the graph, but just as little like guidelines for yourself. You can totally do that. I'm totally fine with it. Next, x scale pi over 4. Again, I'm just going to choose to do 2 boxes. I know that's going to make it look the same as the previous graph, but that's okay. Scales are labeled differently. Just a hint in terms of the labeling too, some people never know where I'm getting my scales from. This is 1 pi over 4, so the next label is 2 pi over 4, which I would say reduces to be pi over 2. The next label is 3 pi over 4, then 4 pi over 4, which is 1 pi, then 5 pi over 4. You don't need to label a ton of these, but just enough so that the viewer knows what's going on, what your scale is. We're ready to put our first point down. So it's time for us to consider what function do we have. We have a cosine curve here, so we need to make ourselves a note. Where does cosine start? So cosine always starts, well, it depends if it's positive or negative. This is cosine positive, so it's going to start at max and then head down. So when I come over here to plot my first point, I'm going to go to the y-axis right here, and I'm going to put my first point down because this has no c-value. There's no left-right translation. So I'm going to start right here at 0, 5. I'm going to my next x label, so at pi over 4, I'm going to be on the middle because I have to go down. The middle brings me to the minimum, so I'm going to go to 2 pi over 4 or pi over 2, get my minimum, over 2 more, now I'm heading back up, 2 more to the top, 2 more to the bottom. Mine are 2 more because that's how I set my scale. If you made 3 boxes be pi over 4, then you'd be skipping 3 boxes every time. I'm going to go backwards also. I don't really like to stop or end on a top or bottom because when I connect them, I want my arrow to be appropriate. And if I stop at the top, I often say my curve continues upwards, and that's incorrect. So this right here, smooth curve, would be the graph of y equals cosine 2x plus 4. And that is graphing sine and cosine curves.